I'd welcome you. You came to get the world views from yours truly, the Honest Jew. Welcome to the 14th episode of the Victor News Network. As usual, another week has passed and another series of things have happened in the world, and that's why I'm here to explore some of the things that have happened, and as well for you to listen. Might I please remind you, really important regarding the nations are open on Subscribestar and Ko-Fi. You'll be finding the links in the description. It will really mean a lot because I'm really looking into trying to find a solution to get a better audio. Since at the end of the day, this is a podcast and it's much more important for you to hear me clearly rather than you to see me clearly. Well, the minimum donation is set for only £5, but you can donate as much as you want, or if that's your preference, you can subscribe monthly. Suggestions regarding videos and any other things that may come into your mind are accepted via either the comments to this video or via email at thehonestjew1@gmail.com, as you can see posted on the screen, or on X, the handle is at thehonestjew1. Might I please remind you to like and subscribe this video, share it with other people that you think they may find such sort of content interesting. It means a lot to me, especially again to trying to breach this barrier at the very beginning with low numbers. YouTube really wants to push forward all sorts of brain rot and the short content in a short format specifically, and that is done at the expense of everybody else that makes long form content, just like me and a whole lot of other people. Links and timestamps, as usual, you can find them in the description. Starting out first with not exactly the October surprise, but we haven't heard about this woman in a while, aside from memes. So that's what we're going to start with, beginning from the US as usual. The New York Post. Hillary Clinton wants that allowing free speech on social media means we lose control. Fact check true. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said Saturday that social media companies must moderate content on their platforms or else we lose total control. Clinton told CNN host Michael Smerconish that while there have been some steps taken at the state level to regulate social media, she wants to see more done by the federal government to moderate content. We can look at the state of California, the state of New York. I think there are some other states have also taken action, Clinton said. But we need national action, and sadly, our Congress has been dysfunctional when it comes to addressing these threats to our children, she added. Clinton said she believes the issue should be at the top of every legislative political agenda and called for the repealing of Section 230 of the Communications Act, which protects online platforms from being able to from being held liable for third-party content, such as user content on social media. This immunity applies to the content itself and the removal of content in certain circumstances. We should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave, platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be just pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted, Clinton said. But we know now that was an overly simple view that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter/X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control, she continued. And it's not just the social and psychological effects, it's real life. Clinton said the social media companies should have their immunity stripped so guardrails could be implemented. She said that cell phones should be restricted in schools, an effort that has been approved by several states in the US, including Florida and California. Individual school districts in various states across the country have also adopted policies banning or limiting cell phone use during school hours. Take the phones out of school, she said. I'm so happy to see schools beginning to do that, where the kids turn their phone in when they walk in the door. And guess what? Kids are paying better attention in class, Clinton added. They are talking to each other in the lunchroom, things that used to be part of your daily life when you were a child in school. Last month, Clinton suggested during an appearance on MSNBC that Americans accused of interfering with the US elections by spreading propaganda promoting former President Trump should be civilly or even criminally charged, as she cited the 2016 election in which she lost to Trump. Well, doesn't that sound to you like a very sore loser making making references to essentially what happened 8 years ago? And let's be sincere about this. The reason why Hillary Clinton lost wasn't because of people saying naughty things on social media back then. But do you remember, since I saw this article mentioning about a somewhat but not really October surprise? Well, the October surprise, which actually happened in September, if I remember correctly, was when Hillary Clinton went in public and called all potential Trump voters a basket of deplorables. That was the moment when she essentially lost the election before the election happened. And as we've seen, the results spoke for themselves. Not to mention another major aspect, that being that even resident Democrats did not exactly want Hillary to be in control, considering the political dynasty she comes from, those being the Clintons, and the Clintons having a closet full of skeletons the size of the Tower of Pisa. You can't exactly blame them. On the, on the other side, even if Biden himself isn't also very clean, if you are to be looking back in the 80s, if I reckon, back when he was a senator for Connecticut, if I remember. Just try to look on YouTube at the senatorial hearings when Justice Clarence Thomas was proposed to join the Supreme Court, and the sorts of things that Biden was saying back then. Well, true, those happened decades ago, and I can understand from one point of view that people have the right to change their minds and their opinions. But in all due honesty, at least mm, Biden and his family haven't been nowhere near as controversial as the Clintons were. And the Clintons were already very controversial ever since the days of Obama, both his first presidential mandate, but especially his second presidential mandate. Do you remember the Clinton Foundation getting about $45 million from the former Saudi prince in order to gain favorable political insight about the things that concern Saudi Arabia? That's only one of the very many. And here we're sticking to the real facts, not to the memes, although even the memes do have a grain of truth inside them. But going back to the topic at hand and the things that Hillary Clinton is saying, well, as I said in the beginning, uh, she is right. It does mean that they lose control. But here we got to ask the question, who exactly are they? Who did she exactly refer to? In my opinion, seeing how batshit insane social media has behaved over the years, and especially since, we're pretty we're pretty, here, social media companies were pretty transparent on this, and even though they didn't exactly support directly one candidate or the other, let's be honest here, the sheer amount of censorship that happened both in the 2016 election, both after the election as well, and in the 2020 election, it was pretty clear who did social media, and especially legacy social media, supported. And it was definitely not the other guy. And you definitely know what I mean here. Hillary Clinton apparently probably forgot that in the Constitution of the United States there's something called the First Amendment, and I find it really ironic that she discusses about repealing Section 230 in order to make the social media companies liable for prosecution based on the content that's published on them. But this wasn't exa when this was discussed when it came to TikTok. Suddenly everybody forgot, and there were also older discussions in the higher ranks of the Republican Party before 2020, specifically since social media for the pro-Trump campaign, it was still very hostile, and and you had and people surely remember, including some of you who watch this podcast, the ban waves that were happening, and then every single reference which was to Trump or any other political situation, they were swiftly dealt with. The traditional 30-day Facebook bans, then you also had shadow bans on Twitter, and at the same time, all the platforms in one way or another, they were also trying to downgrade your content, so the least amount of people possible will see it. While on the other hand, amplifying the establishmentarian voices and then all their NPC lackeys. On the topic of the mobile phones in schools, no, I don't exactly see what exactly is Hillary trying to do right here. This is not something that's too relevant in all honesty, and okay, well, she is right that that okay, so phones have been taken from schools, but phones have been taken from schools for completely other reasons. And let's be honest, that isn't just happening in the US. All across Europe and in other countries, there are more and more measures against mobile phone usage in schools, and in a lot of cases, they do go as you simply drop your mobile phone at the entrance when you start school, and you only pick it up once you will be done. The difference is that I myself was many years ago part of the generation that experienced mobile phones in school. The difference is starting when we got to take into consideration how much did technology change since then. You couldn't have exactly done so many things with a Nokia flip phone in say 2005 or 2006 compared to what you can do with a smartphone ever since they became increasingly more popular. So we're already discussing here about anything over 2011, 2012. And even then, the content that was consumed or the things that were used to be done on the smartphones back when I was still in high school, it's so much more different than it is today. Where credit is due, my high school generation did not have the absolute insanity that appeared later on with things like Snapchat, TikTok in particular. That's already a major one, and whatever other apps which I don't remember right now since they're that relevant to my life. But to the young people, they were relevant, and that's where the paradigm appeared of if you're not on social media, do you really actually exist? Plus, not to mention the social stigma if you happen to be one of those kids who actually got a proper education, or who actually had really enlightened parents, and the parents they didn't exactly shield you away from the current day social media insanity, but other sorts of things that you could access with a smartphone. Not saying here that that blocking you of content is in itself a good thing, because parental controls are also a topic in and of themselves to be discussed. But sticking simply to smartphones, back when I was in high school, and it wasn't exactly an eternity ago, just as I mentioned earlier, smartphones did exist, and I happened to be in a private school, which definitely had kids and adolescents who could afford smartphones, or more like their parents could afford them smartphones. And here we're discussing to what level? Say, for example, if a new iPhone would have appeared in about a week or two tops, I would have already seen it in at least the hands of one single person from my year group, if not more than one person, just to get a perspective of the things. But the addiction towards the smartphone and social media was never to that level. And in all due honesty, back then, social media such as Facebook was still so much more was just so much more unfiltered, and but also so much more unfiltered, but so much more transparent, as it no longer was past that point. And especially since things started ramping up around 2014 with the social media censorship, and definitely started testing bigger and bigger peaks in the 2016 election, but also in the 2020 election. But going back to the topic of mobile phones, I don't exactly see why Shillery mentioned that, oh yeah, this is such a good idea. Well, it was to be expected, because people have already gotten pretty sick of it. And there have been already many schools who have seen the way things would have evolved way before that, and they have already resorted to their own private bans on the phones. But getting back to the kids and adolescents, this thing with social media is also very complicated to be circumventing when it comes to the social stigma. If you happen to not be on the hip social platform that was back then, or is right now for the younger people. Um, Many years ago, you had the prime social media apps. They were Snapchat or Kick. Then once Snapchat became something that was used only by younger people, they moved to TikTok or Instagram. The younger generation abandoned almost altogether Facebook, and then Facebook right after that became essentially, in one way or another, Boomer Central. But when it comes to the individual children, those very few who or who have enlightened parents, and those parents in one way or another try to shield away their children, especially once they will get to the point when they will be capable of understanding just the amount of shit that happens, and not just the amount of shit that happens on the social media platforms, but at the same time, the inherent detriments towards mental health. Look, for example, We already have sufficient cases of evidence where, thanks to consuming short form content, speaking of what I started this video from the very beginning, my complaint against YouTube and their algorithm intentionally pushing forward people who publish many YouTube shorts and downgrading people who create long-term format. So you end up in a situation where you kind of have to pray to the Google God, to the Google algorithm to notice you and to actually at least show show your content to a wider audience, not be intentionally downgraded because Google got scared by TikTok's competition. Getting back though to the discussion about mental health, why, for example, the more Instagram became popular, and that this is how we're going to start it. With Instagram becoming more popular, how did eating disorders start ramping up really high? How did the overall mental health of adolescent girls in particular did go to the shitter essentially once social media became and social media the kind of Instagram where the motivation behind using a platform like Instagram for the vast majority of people is to essentially show the others who are following you that you are living the best life that you can. And things have gotten so bad over the years where it's not only very difficult to make the distinction between who is genuine and who is showing off. The vast majority definitely are showing off, but they're showing off to levels which have been in the past unfathomable. Take for example shit that initially I've seen and heard of in China back in 2013 with the younger rich, the young adults who definitely had a lot of disposable income, but nowhere near disposable income to afford such a lifestyle, arranging with special social media companies to be hiring things like uh, the parking paddock at an airport, or to rent an exotic car, or to rent even a private jet. So they just simply take pictures for you in order for you to post those pictures, professionally done as well, mind you, to post them on social media and especially Instagram, so that you show the rest that you are that you're some guy living the high life. And with this sort of visual fraud, but things have really gotten so bad. That's also one of the reasons why, for starters, you have so many scammers on Instagram because when and that stuff also gets transposed into other places on the internet. Well, when the average person sees you that you're dressed really sharp and they see you next to a Ferrari, regardless if that Ferrari is yours or not, or if they see you climbing down the stairs of a Gulfstream private jet, the vast majority of people are gullible, and this is one of our features as a species. And we're going to get to varying degrees of gullibility later on in this podcast. But the vast majority of people who would open up Instagram and see this, and they will not know the person the individual at a personal level in real life to actually know such stuff, they wouldn't exactly know. And let's be honest, everybody in one way, shape, or form, with very few exceptions. So, okay, virtually everyone follows people that we don't know, or we follow pages or channels or other things like that of people that we don't know, but we may like the content that they're publishing. Well, this also works the same way. But over the years, with more and more visual fraud like this, or intentional lying about how great your life is, people gradually started believing that okay, without being capable of actually thinking clearly and taking into consideration that such a lifestyle is not only not exactly accessible to everybody, but it also takes humongous sacrifices in order to get there. And if you are part of that group which requires humongous sacrifice to get there, odds are that that you may not be having the time required in order to posture yourself on social media like that. And here I'm talking about the vast majority of people. There are sure definitely individuals owning businesses. Take for example Richard Branson, where a good part of the reputation and the marketing of the company or the companies that he owns are also tied to his personal image. But that's not the vast majority of people. When you see us when you see a random which you never heard about and which did not do exactly something notable in order to be standing out. And those things definitely take many years to happen. So success isn't something that hits you overnight. Mm, Success is about 99% perspiration and 1% luck. And there are instances where sometimes, sure, luck can also happen to you, but sometimes, but in plenty of cases, you also have to make your own luck. But gradually, over time, with more and more gullible people ending up on social media, and with us people having materialistic tendencies, which are also amplified by the godlessness of societies today, especially in the West. And here here I stick to the West as an example. Of course, that a lot of people begin believing erroneously that not only, oh, if that guy managed to do it, then that means that I can do it as well. And so, in the desperation and being stuck, but being intentionally stuck because the algorithms are made in this specific way in order to keep you glued to the phone and to dedicate as much attention as possible to either one or another social media platform. They're obviously going to throw you into a positive feedback loop. The only exception as a social media platform that does not do this is Twitter or X, like Elon Musk likes to call it. But for example, Meta social media, Facebook and Instagram, their algorithms have already documented that there are plenty of people, the smart sort of people, not the corpo cuck type from the IT industry who or programming who discussed about how Meta's algorithms function in order to keep you glued as much as possible to the screen. They do function differently because Facebook and Instagram, even though they are owned by Meta, they fulfill different purposes. And for a few long years, they have already been targeting different age groups as a sort of clientele. But when when an app like Instagram pushes you into a positive feedback loop because you've seen or you've clicked the pictures of several people who exactly show on Instagram that they're living a life which they do not actually have, and let's be honest, in a lot of cases that happens to be bogus. people as gullible as they are start believing that again they can do something like that as well. But the problem, and here is where we get into the mental health discussion, is specifically this part where with the algorithm keeping you in a feedback loop, where the more content of a single type you see, the more of that content it will be shoveling towards you. If you're not conscious about this, and let's be honest, many people aren't conscious about this, they will simply start acting really desperate, and things really take a nasty turn when they see somebody who is familiar. Doesn't exactly have to be a friend or somebody closer who they know in real life terms and stuff like that. When you see only that sort of content, you start believing that you want that as well, which creates what's called unrealistic expectations. And here I'm going to go on a tangent here. Mm, there are surely plenty of people who see in one way or another extracts from that podcast on YouTube called whatever, where there's that guy that interviews all sorts of women. And even if you don't watch that sort of podcast, you inevitably end up in one way or another to see other sorts of content like that. For example, street interviews with average guys that just go and ask women randomly on the street, what sort of things would you look for in a man? And when you see the absolute unrealistic expectations, such as, well, I like a guy that makes at least $500,000 a year, who has a six pack, who's got a 6-inch cock, or other absurd expectations like these. Well, surely those people who fit the criteria exist, but the problem appears when individuals, men and women, but here women are the most susceptible to manipulation of this sort. They start believing that because they see this on social media, which pretty much acts like a sort of virtual society, since women were also the reason why women are more amenable, but also less violent, is because they had to rely on the community and the society in order to guarantee survival. So when they end up in these feedback loops, where they see, let's take the example of Mary. Oh, Mary saw on Instagram that Nina, her friend from high school, which she hasn't talked with in the past decade, managed to get some sort of really cool guy who is a head or two heads uh, taller than her, and who's also rumored, because there's no confirmation, who's also a doctor or a banker or a finance bro, or just insert any really high income job over here. And when you still see things like these, of course, that women in the pre-selection process, the vast majority of them will be looking for the most compatible. But still sticking to this thing, especially with these sorts of loops, they create unrealistic expectations. I have to reiterate this point because this is really important. And past a certain point, you are in so deep in the delusion which has been fed to you, and this applies to both men and women equally, even if, as I said earlier, women are more susceptible to this sort of algorithmic manipulation. But even men are just as susceptible, but the difference is that men tend to be more logical, and also men tend to function from a fundamental point of view differently. When a man doesn't see in his surroundings indicators which act as feedback, the rationale is that they go back and they start trying to look at the bigger picture. What exactly am I not doing correct? Because because I looked at the fact that well I should be here, but I'm not exactly here. Plus also men are so much less susceptible to self-delusion, with all due respect over here. So so again, when you're so into deep the algorithmic delusion, and with Western societies being the way they are, sheltering women to some extent from the reality outside, that's a clear reason why you don't why you barely see any women working the really dirty but critical jobs if you want to keep a modern society. Electricians, but here I'm talking about the engineers that go in the field, not the HR lady or the one working in the office. Here I'm talking about sociological examples, talking about the masses. That's why you don't see women in plumbing. Have you ever heard about a woman who works as a residential plumber who drives a van, carries all the pipes and all the tools needed? No, of course. Have you ever heard about any female bricklayers, actually? My bad. No, because again, the social understanding all across the history of modern humanity mm, was that the men build the society because the men are the ones who have the incentive to be building something, not only to leave something behind as a legacy, so that there is a sliver of evidence that they were there. That's related to male personal motivation, but at the same time also enterprises like these would also single them out in female selection, and let's be honest, there's nothing wrong with that. But in the moment when you get to the winter of Western civilization right now, where societies have had it for way too long time, a way too good situation. There's very realistically any hardship when it comes to material means nowhere near to the level where it used to be even 50, 60, 70 years ago. And and again, most of that hardship used to be induced by diseases, by natural disasters, but mostly the most constant one happened to be wars, and tended to also be a reset on the society and the laws, but it was also but it was also partial reset to the countries which were affected by the wars. If you don't believe me, then you're welcome to to check any pictures from Ukraine and what the Russians did there. If they look in any way comparable to a normal city by any chance, they don't. But somebody will have to rebuild that. So these are exactly the issues overall. Indeed, uh, uh, I, s- uh, I see it as a good thing. That that the phones mm, are taken away from the students when they enter a school. But an even better solution would have been for the parents to actually be parents and to be conscious of these things, because after all, you read all that stress, both as a man and as a woman, to select somebody who you could build a family with, and also childbearing and childcare, and then everything from the moment the child is conceived all the way until he ends up being of school age in one way or another, depending on the country we're discussing here. Mm, how is it that how is it and I've seen this phenomenon even since the days when I've been in high school. There are apparently some parents, and there's a surprisingly big number of them who just simply interact with kids like they're sort of roommates. They're roommates, but they're sort of family level roommates. And they started being they started becoming a problem in the past few decades. But one of the good things from my generation is that with the internet being more unfiltered, the internet could also provide you from some perspectives a better education than the parents could have, especially if you had the parents which did not exactly care too much about you to carry out important conversations that would have normally been carried out. But what is normality these days, after all? Things like starting from the adolescence. Well, what? Okay, as a boy, as an adolescent boy. Well, okay, as silly as the discussion about the birds and the bees is, it's a really important one to carry out. Because, okay, any man or woman can intuitively know what to do in bed, although badly at the beginning. But here things differ. But if you don't know what you're doing, and especially at that young age when fertility is really high for women, there are also very high chances that said girl will be conceiving, and you don't exactly want to be stuck at the age of 12 or 13, already a father, but you barely passed into the seventh or eighth grade. So things like this, and also other important discussions. This one with the smartphones has been one that has appeared in the past few years to be carried out. And also ever since drugs became more available, this one's also not a discussion that would have been worth to be carried out with your kids, because the temptation, especially as an adolescent, will always be there, and you do not exactly want as a parent, preferably, here I'm talking about what's as close as you can get to being ideal but not perfect. It will be to not employ the sort of personality where you appear when you appear unapproachable to your children, because if you appear unapproachable to your children, they will not be the ones who will open up these topics about you, because these topics are really serious. Again, when it comes to drugs still carry criminal sentences at the end of the day. And even more so, we don't also want to give the impression that uh, you when the kid wants to discuss with you, you start acting like like you're blockheaded, or you start acting semi-hysterical, things like, I don't want to hear any discussions about sex in this house or stuff like that. For example, the radical Christian parents of kids in the US, they do suffer from this phenomenon as well. Rather than discussing about things realistically as they are, leaving aside personal biases and convictions, that's still important, but barely anybody does it. And with more and more things of this sort happening, things will just get worse and worse. And unfortunately, it's not like things are going to look any better. Just look right now, still sticking with mobile phones. Mm, how far did the attention span went into the shitter considering that I personally heard such conversations between students and professors in university when if they are to watch a instruction video which is between 20 minutes to an hour at worst, but the average is between 35-40 minutes. That apparently requires way too much concentration from them, and they admit to this. They admit to this, and even then, this particular example that I witnessed uh, mentioned that she could barely focus for 5 minutes watching a YouTube video, let alone a university instruction video for a certain topic, which is many more minutes longer than that. It's these things that the more clever people who happen to be bureaucrats or happen to be headmasters or happen to be school directors or other occupations like that. They have already seen it, and they're definitely not happy, because at the end of the day, well, these people will end up becoming adults in society, and if they manifest the the sheer lack of basic things like an attention span, that's already a big problem. And I can understand, okay, there are different teaching styles and there are different styles of understanding, but for all of them, you need an attention span. And if you don't have it, then that's very terrible. That's very terrible, and I'm afraid to consider what sort of society would that look like. Moving on now, and sort of bridging the gap between the countries from the west of the North Atlantic and the east of the North Atlantic. The Telegraph. Joe Biden pushed the UK to surrender Chagos Islands. Senior officials told the incoming Labour government that refusing to sign away the islands would jeopardize the special relationship. Joe Biden, and yes, this is intentional, pushed the UK into giving up the Chagos Islands over concerns the US would lose control of an important airbase, the Telegraph understands. Days after the general election in July, senior officials from the White House's National Security Council and State Department told the incoming Labour government that refusing to sign any of the islands would jeopardize a special relationship with Washington. Sir Keir Starmer was criticized last week for his decision to give up the archipelago of more than 1,000 tiny islands, a UK overseas territory since 1965 and known officially as the British Indian Ocean Territory. It was suggested that the deal would give China access to the Diego Garcia air base, which is on the largest island in the chain. Under the deal, Mauritius will take control of the islands, but Britain and the US will rent the base for 99 years. The Telegraph understands that American officials pushed the UK toward the deal, fearing that if it was not signed, Mauritius would successfully apply for a binding ruling at the International Court of Justice to take control of the islands, effectively shuttering the airbase. The base is considered strategically important because it puts some bomber aircraft within range of the Middle East. Diego Garcia was previously used by the US to conduct bombing runs in Iraq and Afghanistan. The US officials told the Foreign Office that a quick deal should be signed before the American and Mauritian elections next month, agreeing to give up UK territory in exchange for the base. The officials argued that handing over the islands would safeguard Britain's special relationship with the US, and that the binding court ruling would make it more difficult to fly aircraft to the base, conduct repairs, and cooperate with UN agencies. Since announcing the deal on Thursday, the government has faced criticism from MPs who argue that Britain should not have agreed to give up territory and to rent a military base it already controls. Boris Johnson said the terrible deal made the UK look pathetic. Some also argue that the base could come under threat from Chinese spyware because Mauritius and China are economically aligned. The Telegraph understands that the full terms of the deal, which has not been made public, contain protections against Chinese influence in the islands without the agreement of Britain and the US. On Monday, Robert Jenrick said David Lammy had signed the deal so that he could feel good about himself at the next North London dinner party. In a debate discussing the decision in Parliament, the Tory leadership contender said, "We've just handed the sovereign British territory to a small island nation which is an ally of China, and we're paying for the privilege." Also, that the foreign secretary can feel good about himself at his next North London dinner party. However, the foreign secretary told MPs on Monday that the dispute between Britain and Mauritius was clearly not sustainable and that Labour faced a choice between abandoning the base altogether or breaking international law. Friends of the British Overseas Territories, a charity dedicated to British-owned islands abroad, called Mr. Lamy's statement shameful. Proceeding with the transfer of the island goes against our national interest and must be stopped at once, it said. The International Court of Justice has already issued a non-binding ruling that the islands belong to Mauritius, and a further ruling that forced the handover of the base was likely, he said, because of the regrettable removal of indigenous islanders by the UK in the 1960s. Downing Street insisted the deal to give up sovereignty over the British Indian Ocean territory was due to the unsustainable legal position and had no impact on other disputed territories, including the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar. The Prime Minister's official spokesman would not be drawn on the cost to the US taxpayer of the deal, which will see Mauritius being given sovereignty over the islands, with a 99-year agreement to secure the strategically important UK-US military base on Diego Garcia. The spokesman said the government inherited a situation where the long-term secure operation of the military base at Diego Garcia was under threat, which contested sovereignty and legal challenges, including through various international courts and tribunals. You will be aware that the previous government initiated sovereignty negotiations in 2022 and conducted a number of rounds of negotiations. This government picked up those negotiations and has reached an agreement, which means that for the first 7 or 50 years, the base will be undisputed, legally secure with full Mauritian backing. Asked why the islands should not be seen as a precedent for other sovereignty disputes such as the Falklands and Gibraltar, the spokesman said, "It's a unique situation based on its unique history and circumstances and has no bearing on other overseas territories." The spokesman added, "British sovereignty over the Falkland Islands or Gibraltar is not up to negotiation." Well, this is a more complicated discussion to be carried out over here. From one perspective, this is mainly a failure of both the US and also the UK diplomacies. When you are aware that you have such a prized asset, and let's be honest here, it's not just it's not just the airbase in itself, but it's all but as this article outlines, it's also how far the airbase reaches and also the size of the airbase itself. That airbase is a critical asset within the entire Middle East and the things that if things happen to go tits up in the Middle East, what sort of assets can be deployed and moving on from this aspect, both countries were very well aware that the Mauritius did not turn pro-China in a single afternoon. It happened over the course of a few years, and my educated suspicion is that the Mauritians definitely got Chinese backing and Chinese lawyers in order to present at the International Court of Justice as good as possible of a case in order to give the islands back, which included the island where the Diego Garcia Air Force Base is also located. And even if in all honesty, yes, it is British sovereign territory, how does it happen that nobody got the idea many years ago? And okay, initially this should have come from the UK because the UK was the sovereign ruler of the British Indian Ocean territory, but the US at the same time also had interests. How exactly could you not have done in all these many years a deal with the Mauritians in order to keep the status quo as it is, but give them something in order to keep the status quo as it is. Simply just like the Chinese have been doing in order to push the Belt and Road initiatives in many countries all over the planet. why don't you allocate from the huge budgets that you're having some sums of money as you've negotiated with the Mauritian leadership or the Mauritian elite, whomever those may be. Okay, we're going to give you this much money every year, or if you want some, or if you want something special in return for that money, or if you want a partial payment, or if you want, and if you want something else that we can provide you those, as long as you leave this discussion away. And here we can see how far both US and UK diplomacy has fallen compared to where it used to be many years ago. Over, overlooking, either due to lack of vision or due to stupidity, there could be 1,001 answers and definitely a combination of them that could explain circumstances like these. But when you have a critical asset located in a place like this, how could you now have went to direct negotiations in order to keep the situation as it is and to just give the Mauritians what they want? First of all, the ICJ lawsuit could have been avoided like this, and if it couldn't have been avoided because it could have happened due to some local political context, just as it began uh, with the with that president who was essentially in China's pocket. Okay, then and then from that moment on, you could have negotiated with somebody else from the leadership or the elite or the opposition of the leadership. Look, we're going to give you whatever you want. You just name us something so that we can keep the airbase as it is. But as things haven't happened and things were left the way they were for so long, but in the end, the ICJ lawsuit met its end, and it ended up with with a non-binding resolution that the UK will have to give the territories back, and that includes the territory where the airbase sits on. This is definitely, I'm being honest here. This is not exactly complicated diplomacy. There have been many countries that did it, but there have been many much smaller countries with much less economic horsepower that managed to cut deals similar to these, and it's particularly shameful and worrying at the same time how exactly both of these two countries, the US and the UK, are not exactly looking after their own interests, especially when it comes to their own military interests and the geostrategic interests altogether. When you let slip fuck ups like these, but this fuck up, from my perspective, is significantly larger than what Joe Biden, so Beijing Biden, did when the Houthi rebels were bombing from Yemen all kinds of Saudi refineries and Saudi oil fields, and when the US has had since the days of Theodore Roosevelt, so here I'm talking about 1945 or 1946, already a deal cut with Saudi Arabia that the US will be the security guarantor. What exactly was the security guarantee when the Saudis needed it? Because the refineries kept on being bombed, and already there were warnings many years before such things that trouble is brewing up in Yemen, and uh, and we had this deal with you, the security guarantor, which you haven't held up. But because as far as I remember, the US hasn't exactly held up because the bombing still happened and things and the tensions have gotten so bad. No, both Saudi Arabia and the UAE formed a coalition. The UAE, kind reminder, it's a country where the only war it has been on since the Federation of the Emirates has been founded. It only had a local war but that happened to be only between a few hundreds of people. The war in Yemen was the very first that it got engaged on directly with boots on the ground, along with the Saudis. And okay, the motivations differed because the motivation of Saudi Arabia was to essentially secure their own territory by getting rid of the Houthi rebels, while the interests of the UAE were to get rid of the Houthi rebels because the Houthi rebels were also in the pockets of the Iranians. And as we can see, many years later, they haven't exactly done quite a good job at it. When realistically speaking, and there may be some people who may hate me for saying this, a deal was done, and the one who cut the deal did not exactly hold up their own end of the deal, actually doing something in order to squash the Houthis in Yemen, so they don't exactly resort to bombarding refineries and refineries which are bombarded, they essentially fuck up your own country as well because refineries are not something that you build in a single day. It's not something that you build in a week, and it's definitely not something which costs pennies on the dollar to construct. The the oil refineries are something really complicated, really expensive, and it's not. And just like with nuclear refineries, you can't exactly employ an average civil engineer to design you a refinery, especially not a refinery for a country like Saudi Arabia, which is still the dominant power when it comes to supplying oil and other oil-based products. And as we have seen, it first started with the tensions, and of course the Saudi Emirati coalition tried first to support their guy in Yemen. That failed miserably. Then then once the threats intensified, especially when it came to Saudi, things have gone a lot worse. Then there were boots on the ground there, and okay, now I'm not going to go into the operational aspect of it and what sort of shit show it was, but let's just say that at least the Saudi Emirati coalition tried, even if they haven't met their objective. But they did that stuff themselves. The most that other external countries did was to pretty much just give them the market open. If they want to buy any stuff, well, they can just come at our shop. It's just as simple as if you want to go to a hunt and you already have a rifle. It's just like you go to the ammunition store to buy yourself some ammo for that gun. That was about it. But but things are more complicated than this. And again, there have been deals done many decades ago when a lot of people alive right now weren't even a thought back then. And as the things have turned to worse, and after the war went to shit, and essentially there was a soft retreat from Yemen. The Saudis still got the still got the bombings on their own land. At one point, even the United Arab Emirates was visited by a few drones and missiles from Yemen. And let's be honest here, these countries do not border directly each other. Those had to fly for many hundreds of kilometers in order to get there. And it's surprising that barely anybody spotted them. And the Emiratis, I remember still clearly back then, if I think it was 2018 or 2019, they panicked so hard they they turned on the FAD battery that they have from the US, believing in that moment that the Houthis may essentially be bombarding them with ballistic missiles. Of course, ballistic missiles sourced from Iran. And so, seeing here and drawing the lines between that fuck up And this fuck up, with the Houthis not being addressed, and with the Saudi Emirati coalition not reaching their goals for many reasons, into squashing the Houthi rebels in Yemen, you have right now essentially a second Hezbollah in Yemen, and where they started from taking over militarily the country and politically as well. They continued to bombard refineries with drones, and then we're at the 9th of October 2024, where for a year already, not only that Israel is affected directly, but but the Houthi rebels are also threatening the entire shipping traffic, which passes through Bab al-Mandab on its way to the Suez Canal, essentially screwing us over here in Europe. And I personally don't understand how could responses to such things could be so limp-dicked. Because if we are to relate to the wisdom of the ages which are sadly behind us, if you threatened the commercial interests of an entire continent, and especially if those economic interests are so much more critical to you than they used to be back then, we're not in the 16th century anymore, where from Asia we buy luxury products like silk or spices. With the globalized economy the way it is, countries in the West are so much more tied to China, and also the shipping volume is at unprecedented levels. You cannot explain the scale to somebody that would have even lived in the 19th century. They would have never been capable of considering that there are ships several times bigger than the Titanic, essentially carrying in their containers more products than many cities back then were capable of manufacturing. But apparently the more important the global trade has been, the less important the defensive aspect of that global trade has been lacking. Looking at the way things are approached. And here I'll put a simple case. If I would have been the chief of the EU, if I would have been in von der Leyen's place, and with shipping traffic essentially fucking in the ass my entire continent, because suddenly shipping costs have become astronomically higher, and also the entire supply chain is getting fucked again, because container ships, instead of having to go through the Suez Canal, as it has always happened in the past, in more than a century, they have to go the old route in order to circumvent the African continent, which takes many more days, which is many more times more expensive. And it's many more times more expensive because even those ships consume impressive amounts of fossil fuel in order to get all the global trade moving. There's a reason why shipping traffic accounts for about 8% of emissions, and also ships tend to be some of the dirtiest when it comes to pollution standards. Because holy shit, have you ever seen the engine or the turbine of a ship carrying containers? Well, even a small one, even a small container carrier, say one of those that carries like a few tens of containers. Well, the engine is the engine is the size of a house. And in order to power that engine, plus it also has to resist the marine environment, but also have to be pretty long life, since commissioning a ship has never been and will never be a cheap ordeal. We also want to get your return on investment. And so when you face a situation like this, again, getting back to if I was in von der Leyen's place, that would have been the first thing discussed in the European Parliament, and then discuss and vote a temporary measure to create an ad hoc military alliance. Everybody who has a navy, uh, they can voluntarily select uh, what sort of ships they're willing to volunteer for this effort, and then we're gonna go, and if we need to park the ships and threaten them with all the guns of the navy, yes, we will do that. And if you by any chance shoot at us, we're going to shoot at you. With a volley 10 times larger than the one that you shot at us. If the current political classes wouldn't have been so cocked and so lacking of a vision, which takes us to scenarios such as this one right here. Sticking around with absolute insanity, you would have thought that at least in Europe, considering what happened 2 years and a bit ago, if not even less, shit like this would have been seriously reconsidered if the interests would have been, well, the well-being of your own people. The BBC. UK to finish with coal power after 142 years. The UK is about to stop producing any electricity from burning coal, ending its 142-year reliance on fossil fuel. The country's last coal power station at Ratcliffe-on-Soar finishes operations on Monday after running since 1967. This marks a major milestone in the country's ambitions to reduce its contribution to climate change. Coal is the dirtiest fossil fuel, producing the most greenhouse gases when burned. Minister of Energy Michael Shanks said, "We owe generations a debt of gratitude as a country." The UK was the birthplace of coal power, and from tomorrow it becomes the first major economy to give it up. It's a really remarkable day because Britain, after all, built her whole strength on coal. That is the Industrial Revolution, said Lord Deben, the longest-serving Environment Secretary. The first coal-fired power station in the world, the Holborn Viaduct Power Station, was built in 1882 in London by the inventor Thomas Edison, bringing light to the streets of the capital. From that point through the first half of the 20th century, coal provided pretty much all of the UK's electricity, powering homes and businesses. In the early 1990s, coal began to be forced out of the electricity mix by gas, but coal still remained a crucial component of the UK grid for the next two decades. In 2012, it still generated 39% of the UK's power. But the science around climate change was growing. It was clear that the world's greenhouse gas emissions needed to be reduced, and as the dirtiest fossil fuel, coal was a major target. In 2008, the UK established its first legally binding climate targets, and in 2015, the then Energy and Climate Change Secretary Amber Rudd told the world that the UK would be ending its use of coal power within the next decade. Dave Jones, Director of Global Insights at EBR, an independent energy think tank, said this really helped to set in motion the end of coal by providing a clear direction of travel for the industry. But it also showed leadership and set a benchmark for other countries to follow, according to Lord Deben. I think it's made a big difference because you need someone to point out to say, there, they've done it. Why can't we do it? He said. In 2010, the renewables generated just 7% of the UK's power. By the first half of 2024, this had grown to more than 50%, a new record. The rapid growth of green power meant that coal could be switched off completely for short periods, with the first coal-free days in 2017. The growth of renewables has been so successful that the target date for ending coal power was brought forward a year, and on Monday, Ratcliffe-on-Soar was set to close. Chris Smith has worked at the plant for 28 years in the environment and chemistry team. She said, It is a very momentous day. The plan has always been running, and we've always been doing our best to keep it operating. It is a very sad moment. Lord Eben served in former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's government when many of the UK's coal mines were closed and thousands of workers lost their jobs. He said lessons had to be learned from that for current workers in the fossil fuel industry. I'm particularly keen on the way in which this government, and indeed the previous government, is trying to make sure that the new jobs, of which there were very many green jobs, go to the places which are being damaged by the changes. So in the North Sea oil areas, that's exactly where we should be doing carbon capture and storage. It's where we should be putting wind and solar power, he said. Although coal is a very polluting source of energy, its benefits has been in being available at all times, unlike wind and solar, which are limited by weather conditions. Kate O'Neill, the chief operating officer at the Energy System Operator, the body overseeing the UK's electricity system, said, "There is a whole load of innovation required to help us ensure the stability of the grid, keeping the lights on in a secure way. A crucial technology providing that stability Kate O'Neill spoke of is battery technology. Dr. Sylvia Wallace, research program manager at the Faraday Institution, said that there has been significant progress in the science of batteries. There is always scope for a new technology, but the more focus these days is really how to make it more sustainable and cheaper in production," she said. To achieve this, the UK needs to become more independent of China in producing its own batteries and bringing in skilled workers for this purpose, she explained. Now, since we're discussing about this, and well, we'll definitely discuss many more things. I've prepared something for you, the audience, to be witnessing in order to see how this situation really translates on the ground for the average consumers. You've probably heard me say, possibly in the previous podcasts, about just how insane the energy policy is here and just how dishonest it has been implemented, starting with the majority of electricity being produced by combined gas cycle power generation. But at the same time, the prices of the gas were tied to the markets in Europe. And back in 2022, when the price of when the price of natural gas blew up, it also blew up over here. Now, now see, here, here you see Scottish Power. So this is a UK company which provides electricity to people, just like everybody else in Europe is accustomed. In plenty of countries, you can get your own electricity provider depending on what sort of deals have you cut. In this case, since this is a bill I have from a certain individual whose identity I will prefer to keep secret, in the past few years, and especially as he lived here in the pandemic, he's not from Britain, but has been living here for a long time, and he's as naturalized as somebody can get. Due to the nature of the things that have happened, and with all the shockwaves that have went on, not just in the UK but everybody else. There have been instances over the course of his life in these past few years, especially from 2020 on up until now, where he simply could not work exactly in the field that he's working, and that meant that you cannot exactly earn money because you're not working. Finding a job is really difficult when the industry that you're working on is going tits up, because that said industry depends on a lot of other countries and a lot of other contexts, such as a logistics chain actually functioning. Here I'm going to show you the consequence of what happened over the course of these 3 years. See right here very clearly just how much he has to pay up until this moment. Now you probably put it into perspective. You can put it into perspective just uh, in order to look at this, and this is a guy who has a family, and he doesn't exactly have a large family. He doesn't live with 20 people in the house. He lives just with his wife and with his two kids. Has a pretty average home by UK standards. It's a three bedroom. It's he's got a gas boiler for heating, which was a really smart choice. He also changed it 3 years before the pandemic with a more efficient condensation one. But and when it comes to electricity consumption, it definitely does not consume anything which can be considered absurd. He hasn't got an electric car because he's an associate of mine. He doesn't exactly work with this sort of insanity. Mm, he doesn't also have, say, significant electricity consumers. He's mostly gone out of the house, just he and his wife and his kids as well. So most of the time in the house, nobody consumes electricity, with the exception of the smart meter, the fridge, and that's about and the oven whenever they'll be cooking something. So even the stove that he uses is on gas, it's not on electric. Then they have other devices which just like almost everybody has. Well, he's got a TV that watches from time to time. It was also one of the newer ones, so it's not like a plasma TV that consumes 300 watts of power. Well, he's also got a laptop, smartphones, and that was about it. If say if this was a house which had electric radiator heating, this would have been not exactly understandable, but at least partially explainable. But this is not the case. Here I'm talking about a person who lives in an average house with with an average family with average electricity consumption tendencies, and the situation got to this. I'm gonna have to show it again in order to really put it into perspective just how fucked this country is from this point of view. And it's not like he hasn't tried. I'm pretty sure, and I can vouch for him that he really tried. Even he really tried as much as possible. But now he's in his with these sort of utilities bills and with the increasing difficulty to keep up with them, not just because of the shit that went on years ago, for which the consequences we still suffer from today, and we will suffer from for a while from now on. But at the same time, right now he's looking into moving into a completely different field. So that means he went back into education at least partially, so that he can go into another field because in the field that he's been working on, where he used to make really good money in the past, and he did have reserves. He did have cash reserves because specifically for what if something shit happens in the next few years. I may have to be prepared for this. Um, Here we're looking at the consequences, even with those savings that he gathered. They simply they simply evaporated just trying to survive unemployed. And now he went into debt with the government in order to study something which will hopefully prove more financially lucrative in the near future than what he used to do when and which he could no longer work at a economically viable level because that industry just went into shit. Things have gotten this bad, and these things will not exactly be balancing anytime soon. And this is something that everybody suffers from in this country. When we are to get back at the discussion at hand with okay, the UK pledging that they will be cutting coal-fired power stations from the energy mix up to a certain point. Well, okay, you signed the treaty, and I can understand from the point of a country and as a government, especially a country like this one, which is so adept to respecting its commitments. That's not per se a bad thing, but you also have to look at how realistic those commitments are and what sort of preparations do you have when you reach in a situation where it would be the best approach would be to delay on that commitment because you have suddenly a whole lot of other problems over here. Sure, when electricity prices blew up because natural gas got more expensive, there have been some price caps that were implemented. All these prices are with the price caps. But later on, right when the price caps were implemented, I think in 2022, I did not move into this country when the price caps were implemented for electricity. It was also the moment when essentially many of the electricity providers coerced the people into moving to variable rate electricity because on the other hand plenty of people wanted variable rates, and here I'm talking about the upper middle classes who can afford, unironically, to spend a lot of tens of thousands of pounds, of course, on financing, so on credit, not like they poured all that cash in an instant to buy electric cars. And to have variable rates, it's preferable because the electric car, if you are to if you are to charge it during the night when electricity is the cheapest, that's preferable. But that's one difference from you choosing as a consumer to have variable rates. But it's a completely different story when you essentially no longer provide fixed rates for uh, for whatever reason, and you force everybody to apply for variable rates. And this is something that even the electricity providers are not are they're partially not at fault for this, because even the electricity providers, plenty have ended up bankrupt because of when they dealt, especially with large consumers of electricity. In order to take from the grid, they set a certain sum of money to pay for that electricity that they consume. And when the war in Ukraine began and the natural gas went haywire in terms of pricing, you end up having the opposite problem, where suddenly the electricity that we are buying from the producers, but the one that we have to sell, well, we have to cover the difference, and that price difference, which ended up amounting to some tens of millions of pounds between the production price and the sale price, has bankrupted many. So so in the case of those energy traders, just like Scottish Power as an example, but this one's one of the good examples which did have sufficient capital in order to cover circumstances like these in the economy. Uh, the rest weren't so lucky. So you ended up with a consolidation of the market and with essentially a oligopoly. Yeah, let's just say that's the right word for it. It's an oligopoly because you no longer have that many energy providers because the vast majority of them ended up bankrupt when they could no longer pay the price differences between the sale price and the production price. So when you're in an oligopoly and without resorting to conspiracies here, but everybody kind of looks at what the other does, and if say the one that's bigger implements variable rates and gets rid of fixed rates, everybody else will be looking and implementing those variable rates because that will also reduce their potential collateral in case something happens again, similar to what happened in 2022. And from a business's point of view, That's perfectly understandable. What's not understandable is that definitely the government should have handled this much better. They they could have either delayed the accord and just simply write a justification. We understand that we signed this act back then, but considering that the geopolitical and economic context changed, well, we're going to delay our aim to cut down coal by 2024, and we're going to move it up to 2028. That could have been done. Or they could have simply applied the German method because Germany being the country that was principally affected by by the problems with natural gas exploding in price. Because again, where exactly is the price index of the natural gas in Europe calculated? It's in Frankfurt, which is in Germany. And Germany also had some of the worst situations when it came to residential consumers essentially getting bankrupted because they essentially wanted something like heating their house during the winter. Their bills look so astronomical, and plenty of people, especially the older people, ended up kicked out of their houses because they could no longer afford to pay the gas bill. And let's be honest, when it comes to Europe, you cannot exactly not afford to heat your house because winters are not something that you play with here. Well, at least in the case of the UK, winters, even in the circumstances uh, where temperatures are not exactly that great, okay, they're not great, but they're not great. Here we talk about mm, several degrees below minus. We're not talking about several tens of degrees below minus, and definitely many weeks of snow, like it happens in continental Europe. And even if on average houses tend to be really well firmly isolated here, just as they are in Germany, you still need at least some sort of heating in the house, because if you don't, then you end up in other issues. One of the disadvantages of firmly isolating a house really well, but also not having an open fire, like fireplaces used to be a thing both in this country but also in other countries. Um, the atmosphere inside the house has a higher humidity index than or a higher humidity percentage than a house that would have had a fireplace. So if you don't heat your house constantly and if you don't heat it uniformly, you start getting into other issues such as black mold. And if you think that having all sorts of muscular and bone issues because of cold weather is a problem, then you definitely haven't seen what could happen to you if you were to be exposed to black mold. And here in the UK, but also in Germany, but UK to a greater extent, that's an even bigger problem because the atmosphere, since here it's a country that everybody knows that it rains a lot of good part of the year. It's not exactly like the atmosphere is drier, so that the humidity can have somewhere to escape to. No, it tends to happen that if that you already have a very humid atmosphere outside, which is also cold. So that means that humidity drops atmospherically at a lower level. But at the same time, if you don't heat if you heat your house, your humidity will be still somewhat lower in your house. But if you don't, it's going to get higher, and it's going to get higher to the level where if you were to sleep in a room which is not heated, and in an average winter in the UK, if you were to not heat it, the room would be somewhere between 8 to 12 degrees. In the morning, assuming that you could actually sleep with all that cold in the room. You might as well just get one of those squeegee blades and go to the nearest window and just simply pull it, and the water will start pouring off the window glass. This is how situations are like here, and this is definitely not something new, but definitely something that could have been handled so much better. Again, going back to the Germans, how is it that the Germans, who also had their own environmental commitments, some of them on par with the UK's, how is it that they managed to covertly discover that they had coal-fired power plants, and they not only discovered them, but they also turned them on, and they turned them on hard. They turned them on hard because if let's be honest, if they did not turn them on hard, Germany would have looked completely different today. And of course, you mean most of the people who watch this podcast will surely be aware of this episode in German energy history, but also how cleverly the Germans have been hiding for a while this fact that they turned on their coal-fired power plants, but they also not only reopened the coal mines, but they planned on opening even more coal mines. And here we're talking about countries on the same continent, and countries who, for a good long while, they were part of the same economic union, who also had more or less the same environment commitments. How is it that they managed to do it, but we couldn't? Here I'm going to be quoting exactly Lord Debed. Where was it? Mm, oh yeah, there, they've done it. Why can't we do it? I would use this argument right against him. How is that the Germans could do it and yeah, and you couldn't? You're not only left the people freezing or nearly bankrupting them or putting them into poverty because electricity prices shot up to this level of absurdity. But instead of alleviating the pressure on your own population, after all, you are just squeezing them harder. You're just squeezing them harder because apparently the way you look outside to the world because you signed some climate or environment commitment many years ago when the geopolitics situation looked completely different from the way it does now. Uh, that is more okay and that's preferable compared rather than actually providing the basics to your own population. Have some food for thought for this, and then mm, from this moment on, I definitely do not wish to hear anybody who would be praising the West because they are so much higher than everybody else when it comes to levels of thinking, and also there's not as much corruption as it is in the West, and there's so much civilization in the West. I can see the indices of that. Mm, and especially I can see the indicator of this level of civilization. And let's be honest here. This is definitely not the way to go. This goes completely against what the rest of the planet is doing when the rest of the planet struggles to up their standards or at least keep them as flat as possible. You have these outliers, but these really important outliers because the UK is not the Central African Republic. The UK is still the sixth economy on the planet, doing shit like this, and then trying to parade moralistic ideals because we were the first to implement it, and then we were the first to get out of it. Yeah, sure. Nobody will remember you for that. Well, and if they will remember you, they'll remember you for the wrong reasons that you think. Where do you think you are? Now, since we've discussed about plenty of serious topics, let's depart a little bit from the seriousness of the previous news into something a bit more partially amusing, so to speak. Daily Mail. Defra left with egg on its face in online revolt over the chicken database crashes website, as pranksters list rubber chickens and chicken nuggets as pets. People who keep chickens in their garden now face prison and large fines if they fail to register them under strict new rules brought in to tackle bird flu. But within hours of the new government database going live on October the 1st, protesters and pranksters managed to crash its website by listing as pets everything from rubber chickens to chicken nuggets. The controversial clampdown, which also applies to keepers of pigeons, ducks, geese, and birds of prey, has been introduced as a part of a UK-wide effort to prevent the spread of bird flu. Previously, only flocks of 50 or more had to be registered with the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and the Animal and Plant Health Agency, but he has been expanded to all owners who keep birds outdoors, even just a handful, who now face 6 months imprisonment and fines up to £2,500 for each unregistered bird. Outraged by the petty regulations, several posted images of birds that they had just registered, mostly wrapped in plastic with cooking instructions attached. One commentator on X registered himself dressed in a chicken costume. However, another observed, so all the people who tried to register the roast chickens from Tesco have managed to crash the Defra website and now it's not working. It's not big or clever, stop sniggering. Last night the site was still suffering from technical problems. One smallholder from Easington, County Durham, who has not to be named, said, "This is just bureaucracy gone mad. I keep a small flock of chickens on my allotment for their eggs. I move them indoors at great expense during the recent bird flu outbreak, and there has never been a problem with this. I know other keepers who say they've been prepared to move a few birds they own into their loft to avoid detection rather than register them. The policy aims to stop the spread of avian flu, which led to millions of birds being culled in 2021 after 360 cases were detected. Government officials stress any punishment for non-compliance will be proportionate. But pigeon fanciers also fear the application process will criminalize their hobby. Tim Gunter from Rhondda Valley Pigeon Federation said it will lead to a lot of fanciers finishing. He added, "There's no reason for the government to know. It's a hobby, so why should we register? Pigeons are not known to carry avian flu." The registration form asks amateur enthusiasts to state why they are keeping the birds, whether they are a zookeeper, farmer, rescue center, or hobbyist, and the location and species of each bird. Jane Howarth, founder of the British Hen Welfare Trust, based in Devon, agrees with the need to keep a register, but added, "Unfortunately, Defra held the consultation and then ignored the results, imposing what many see as unnecessary bureaucracy. I'm unsurprised at the reaction." However, Surrey-based poultry show judge Jed Dwight backed the registration scheme, adding, "I do not share the view that this is heavy-handed. A register of all birds is needed." A DEFRA spokeswoman said, we have been made aware of ongoing issues with the online portal. We have received a high number of applications and are working at pace to process these, but you can still register if you keep birds by completing the form and submitting it to email or post. This register is an important step to combating the spread of bird flu, providing keepers with important information about a disease that has had significant impact in the poultry sector. So, are you saying that essentially the Ku Klux Klan partially won? Essentially, yes, shitposting, but shitposting in such a way that it crashed the registration website. Now, as funny as this article is, and I definitely love the title, Daily Mail sometimes has this penchant of putting really funny titles for what are at surface level really funny events that happen in this country, just as this one with with you having to register any sort of bird that you keep outdoors. And you start thinking who exactly is in Defra, so the department, the Department of Food, Animal Affairs, and whatever. Who cares realistically what the acronym stands for? They're part of the government, but from one level to take it from the industrial, or at least the larger size poultry sector, into forcing everybody who may be having well, a few pigeons, all the way to something really simple as a cockatiel in its cage, partially held outside for a bit. Well, this is pure insanity, and I personally don't blame the people who have shit posted on this platform up to the level where they crushed it. Even this article outlines this aspect pretty clearly, and I'll bring a good example as to why the worry of these people is warranted. The article says that the policy aims to stop the spread of avian flu, which led to millions of birds being culled in 2021 after 360 cases were detected. And this is sadly the standard procedure when it happened, when things like these happen. You also had you also had I remember of a case, I think even this year, and a year ago as well, with some African pig flu, which had exactly the same consequence. But it had the same consequence for the same reason that the government forced a lot of the farmers who had even singular numbers of pigs to call to register them also under this pretense that if you don't if you don't report it, then we have an epidemic for that animal, or for those animals. Um, it would lead to huge losses in the sector, and the response will be proportionate. In the end, they started hiding the pigs, and then they started not reporting them. But the ones who tried to be good and upstanding citizens, aka sincere, they're they're the ones that they also ended up getting screwed by the system. Now is this really fair for them? Is this really fair for them? So if you have two or three pigs, which is something not abnormal by Romanian ruler standards, then or if you try to have a sort of small business where you have probably 5 or 6 pigs, out of which two or three you and your family are going to eat it, and the rest you're going to sell for a little bit of extra income, since living in rural Romania is not exactly the most well, for financially enriching existence. You can't exactly blame the people that they did something like this, but when you have inspectors from the sanitation authority or from the animal health agency coming along with the police in order to either forcefully make you register the animals, and if you have already had them registered, they essentially just take them and kill them because, oh no, we have this disease that affects all the pigs, so we're just going to resort with a heavy-handed approach of we'd rather kill millions of pigs, or in this case millions of birds, uh, because of a few cases. Now let's be honest here. Let's be honest here. This is insanity. And since in the case of the UK, this has already happened. So millions of birds were killed in 2021 for only 360 cases of bird flu. On the other hand, Do you want to know what happens when the government goes over its head? You just have to ask the Danish mink farmers. For those who may not know, in during the pandemic, some genius people from the Danish government, uh, based on some research, God knows where they pulled it out from, they took into consideration and they took it really seriously that also the minks, which were held by quite a few Danish farmers. Those minks were raised and kept for their fur, so that the fur would be transformed later on into fur coats, specifically for the Chinese market, because the Chinese market is still big on is and will still be big on the women, especially having fur coats, especially fur coats from Europe. The government reached to the bogus conclusion then that in order to stop the spread of the coof, we're going to go to these farmers who had their animals registered as the law demanded to the state, and the Danish government went to pick them all up and massacred them. Millions of minks were massacred. And Denmark is not a big country. Okay, even the minks are not by themselves as animals big, but when we talk about millions of minks, they're definitely it's similar to having millions of birds being killed. So as the minks were killed because those government officials thought that they could contain the spread of the coup like that. Mm, so not only up to this day, I haven't heard yet if the farmers have been paid any compensation because you essentially destroyed their business in that moment. Okay, it's a high income business because hell, fur coats are not something really cheap, even in China, where apparently things are cheap. Yeah, the fur coats that come from Europe, those those fur coats are not for the average person. They're for people who could dump $3,000 to $5,000 on a fur coat without even batting an eye. Okay, for whatever reason, yeah, I know the reason. It's for showing that you have a certain status symbol, but that's irrelevant to this discussion. The reality is that uh, the reality is that those farmers had their businesses and their livelihoods destroyed, and I haven't heard of them receiving any compensation whatsoever for what the government did to them. But even then, that's a mild case compared to the UK, where birds and especially chickens, ducks, and geese are at the end of the day animals that are being eaten. They're part of a food chain. They're part of a food supply chain. It's not just the chickens or the ducks themselves or the turkeys or whatever that you find in the supermarket. But that sort of meat also goes to a lot of restaurants. And if there's something that the pandemic has shown us, the food produce consumption is so much bigger from coming from the restaurant sector than whatever people are consuming by themselves, especially in the first world countries. And Australia has been the best indicator of this. So obviously, when out of tens of millions of birds, you kill a few millions of them in order to contain the bird flu. What's the next logical step that will happen from an economic point of view? Well, you will definitely raise the prices because you as the grower and the breeder and the one that raises the chickens or the geese or whatever, you get the idea. You have to somehow recoup those costs of those millions of animals that you lost, which translates into the meat that you're going to sell later on being more expensive. because you're suddenly not be capable to sell a good percentage of the entire herd of birds that you had, well, because of a flu. I'm absolutely astonished because avian flu, especially since 2005. But there were also other cases of avian flu or bird flu in the past. I'm still astonished that from no way, shape, or form better epidemiological control measures when it comes to animals haven't been devised, and the procedure still remains like this. So not only you've already got three examples. You got this one from the UK, you got the one with the pigs from Romania, then you have the one with the minks from Denmark. To make it comparable and to say that it's not just this happening here. It happens in other countries as well in the exact shape or form. How is this still something tolerated? There definitely have to be better methods out there in order to control situations like these. Because again, just like with the previous article discussing and you, the audience, observing just how atrocious the government measures were. This one had the exact same. This one has the exact same consequence back then in 2021. Well, suddenly the price for all sorts of bird meat have gotten dramatically up, and when you couple it with the inflation in itself, because even the government printed out more money, and then you have extra inflation because you have the poultry growers having to recoup costs for essentially something which they are not at fault, because bird epidemics happen. Bird epidemics happen, and of course they are the most interested into keeping their flocks alive and their flocks as healthy as possible, especially now with the food associated health controls being so stringent. And that's how they're so interested into again keeping their flocks alive, and to in case something like an avian flu epidemic happens, they're also going to be the ones interested first because they'll be the first to observe it. They're not going to be the state veterinarians who will see it, or some pricks from the health and safety bureaucracy of civil servants. They're going to be the first to observe this, and they're going to be the first who will take action. Well, holy shit, we have a problem. We have too many chickens dying. Let's check and see what's the issue, and let's take appropriate measures. But apparently this is not the way things are carried out. And again, it's absolutely astonishing that after so many decades, where every country in one way, shape, or form has had institutions like these, did not come up with a better measure except this one, would essentially commit genocides within those animals, just because you detected a few cases. You detected a few cases per a few millions. Now, in continuation with our podcast, this news article, those who are Romanian may prefer to simply skip over this one, but the reason why I chosen it is that it appeared in Reuters, and it's about a woman that you surely know about right now because she's been discussed about way too much when it comes to the Romanian presidential election. So this specific fragment is more dedicated for the non-Romanians and to shed some light onto the situation as it actually is. Reuters. Romania's top court removes a far-right candidate from presidential race. Romania's top court has removed a pro-Russian far-right politician from the list of presidential candidates in upcoming elections, prompting concerns about democratic values from candidates across the political spectrum. The European Union and NATO member Romania is due to hold a two-round presidential election on the 28th of November and the 8th of December, with parliamentary polls in between. Nearly 20 politicians have officially entered the running, with opinion polls showing voter preferences highly fragmented. Among them is Diana Șoșoacă, leader of SOS Romania, a small ultra-nationalist Eurosceptic opposition party which surprisingly won 2 seats in the European Parliament in June. Romania's Constitutional Court met on Saturday to discuss legal challenges brought against 6 candidates. It rejected 5 but accepted challenges against Șoșoacă without explaining its decision. Fake news. Șoșoacă, who was live on Facebook at the time of the ruling, told her followers, "This proves the Americans, Jews, and the European Union have plotted to rig the Romanian election before it has begun. From this moment, we have clear proof that in Romania dictatorship and other lack of democracy are being discussed." The court typically releases detailed explanations of its rulings at a later date. Politicians across the political spectrum said the ruling was an unprecedented threat to democratic values. Yes, because they're dumb. Because the 9-member court is politically appointed, many politicians also accused it of interference. Opinion surveys show leftist Social Democrat Prime Minister Marcel Ciolacu is likely to go through to the second round of the presidential election, but it is unclear who he will run against. Although the role is largely ceremonial, the president's powers include nominating the prime minister after elections and appointing judges and prosecutors. They also include oversight of foreign policy, meaning the new president will play a critical role in Romania's commitment to supporting Ukraine. So just as I said, this article is not for Romanians, but in any case, if you're still interested to continue, then you're welcome to do so. If not, there's a reason why the links and timestamps are in the description. If you want to skip this topic, you just move on to the next one. Now, when it comes to the way voting is done in Romania, first of all, you got to understand that Romania is a parliamentary republic. And by definition, the most important elections by far in Romania are the parliamentary elections, which for many reasons that would be too extensive to discuss in in a single particle in a single fragment of the podcast. There will simply be not enough time. But the Romanian population, the vast majority erroneously have things mixed up because just like in any other parliamentary republic who is also part of the European Union, you got 4 elections: presidential, parliamentary, local elections, and European Parliament ones as well. But and the parliamentary elections, just like the local elections, they're held every 4 years, while the presidential and European Parliament elections are held every 5 years. But while the Reuters article partially outlines what's the role of the president, yes, when it comes to foreign policy, the president is most of the times the one that's sent to Brussels or to NATO and to other meetings of this sort, just as the president is responsible for receiving foreign dignitaries and foreign presidents or other members of the state when they're on official visits within Romania. Now, as you've heard me mention NATO, this is also another thing which, for whatever reason, it's either because journalists in the West have nosedived in capacity and intelligence to a shocking extent, The president also has another role, and a pretty important one, in the Romanian government. He is also a member of what's called the Supreme Council of Country's Defense, so the CSAT, CSAT, and part of that Supreme Defense Council. It's yes, indeed, also the Prime Minister, but it's also the President. They all get confidential and secret wires from the intelligence services. So it's not just it's not just oversight on foreign policy and um, nominating the prime minister, but also appointing judges and prosecutors. And judges also include the judges to the Constitutional Court, which is the court in discussion right now. It's not just any court that invalidated Diana Shoshka's candidacy to the presidency. It was the Constitutional Court that did it. Now, in order to explain for the Westerners who Diana Shoshka is, well, realistically, not much is known really about her, aside from the fact that she herself had said many years before that she was apparently half Macedonian, but from North Macedonia, not the Greek Macedonia, who nobody can exactly confirm if that is true. But overall, this is a pretty peculiar character when it comes to Romanian politics, and the reason why she and her party were voted in the previous European Parliament elections. It was simply a troll vote. It was a troll vote by a few tens of thousands of people, which is how Shoshaka got her own spot and another extra person part of SOS Romania into the European Parliament. And and okay, when it comes to her, she became initially really notorious during the pandemic, because during the pandemic she really did make a few good points about the dictatorial measures that the government implemented against the population in order to control the coup, which looked awfully similar to what you have seen in other places in the first world, with mandatory quarantine, getting hauled from the airport into a quarantine center. That's at least what happened in the first 3 months when a state of when a state of emergency was issued, and the Romanian government back then, who was ruled by the National Liberals, the prime minister was Ludovic Orban back then. That's essentially what happened, and there are plenty of videos, including videos in Romanian from my colleague Lucian about this, and then the subsequent chronic abuses on personal liberties, invoking how how not only realistically the personal liberties and the freedom of movement of people was squashed, and things were so close to turning worse, that was back in 2021, when the parliament when there was a parliament vote in order to implement the green certificate, so that EU vaccination certificate, which was also very controversial in pretty much everywhere where the pandemic was taken far too seriously. So it would have been mandatory for you to show that vaccination certificate if you wanted to do things like going to work. And there were certain cases and certain fights where even retail stores would not have accepted people, especially the retail stores which were incorporated into malls, into shopping malls. You couldn't first enter the shopping mall if you did not have a green vaccination certificate. So obviously, if you couldn't enter the mall, you couldn't go to the supermarket either within the mall because you didn't have a separate entrance. Nobody would have thought that lunacies like these would exist. And things and the application of the epidemic measures, again sticking to the example with the supermarket, they were so absurd where in places like the Kaufland supermarket, so the German retail chain, put fences which could segregate the vaccinated from the non-vaccinated, which was honestly in itself really really absurd. And that's how the Anusha Shaka became notorious. It started for the right reasons, but then once the war in Ukraine began, that's when she started. She and her rhetoric in particular started slipping to such a level which looks more akin to a schizophrenia patient rather than even a controversial politician. And even this article, it might sound it might sound malintended, but it's actually true. The quote where Shoshaka said on a Facebook Live right after the ruling. That the Americans, the Jews, and the European Union plotted to rig the Romanian election specifically to take her out. That is true. That's indeed what she said. And again, the video is right out there because Diana and whoever manages her Facebook profile is not the sort of person who would delete such things because that's how she built her reputation. And going back to Ukraine, she was also very staunch in being anti-war, and all the things that she said has given birth to quite a lot of impressive conspiracies. Aside from being pro-Russian, which realistically can be taken into consideration as being plausible, because and this is what we will discuss a bit later on about the motives of the Romanian Constitutional Court as they were published 2 days ago. That was outlined. Those were outlined as well. But not only with her perspective of being anti-war and to some extent believing that somehow with the war in Ukraine, Romania will join on Ukraine's side, which will mean that Romania or other European country will trigger Article 5, and we will essentially be having World War III fought on the same lines as the Barbarossa offensive back when the Austrian painter invaded that part of the world, which was complete lunacy back then, just as it is complete lunacy right now, because the situation is in no way comparable. But her message did have some appeal to a significant bunch of people, especially the people who were way too sick with the current with the current way how the establishmentarian politics function, and that is how she grew sufficient notoriety in order to gain sufficient votes for her to depart from Romanian politics and to go into the European Parliament, where she just kept on doing mm, what she knew how to do best. To say really controversial things, just like this one with the American Jewish and EU conspiracy, and for rigging the election. Uh, hell, the first day she was at the parliament, she went with Orthodox icons, and then she said that she's going to bring a priest because the European Union's parliament is full of Satanists and full of demons. Well, regardless what you think about it, these play into a bigger thing, and this is a thing that we will get to in a bit. So, so the one with Diana Shoshaka being a pro-Russian is very plausible, considering that right after the war began, there have been public records of her visiting the Russian embassy and visiting the Russian ambassador in Bucharest, not once, not twice, but several times. And here I'm talking about the former Russian ambassador Valery Kuzmin, in case you want to look into it further. And it wasn't just her, but there were also other people, well, whose names I don't exactly remember right now. But here we focus on Diana Shoshaka herself. At the same time, compared to the other party which she was originally part of. So here I'm talking about the Alliance for the Union of Romanians, so the Our Party. That's how she began initially, and that's how she in 2020 she managed to win a spot as a senator in the Romanian parliament because she was a candidate on the electoral list of the Our Party, so the one on the Unionist Party. But not exactly long after, so especially after the war in Ukraine began, that's also the moment when she started fighting with the co-chairs of the party, and she was essentially expelled from the party, and that's when she built up her new party, which is SOS Romania, which is as lunatic as it can get now. In order to move on, now I'm going to explain the motives of the Romanian Constitutional Court. Well, summarize them, paraphrase a bunch of it because it's several pages long. I'm not going to go and read it entirely, no, especially since it's Romanian and I haven't written up a translation of it. The link to the document in Romanian from the Constitutional Court's website will be in the description box right after the timestamp with this news article. Overall, the way the Constitutional Court justified the removal of her from the presidential candidates list was because she essentially pushed all sorts of secessionist propaganda. And and particularly not only outright anti-EU propaganda, but also anti-NATO propaganda, and just as I was saying earlier about her, also legitimately pro-Russian propaganda. And these are not exactly assumptions as it would have happened in other cases. There is quite a bunch of truth here as well. Diana Shoshaka was interviewed several times by really odious media outlets, which are like Sputnik, which is known for many years to be essentially a a pro-Russian mouthpiece controlled by lackeys from Moscow. I'm not exactly sure if it's Margareta Simonian, who is also directs Sputnik, just like she directs Russia Today, and pretty much functions the same way. But also those meetings with the Russian ambassador, and then when she was asked what sort of discussions she could carry out as a senator of Romania with other members of the parliament, she just kept her trap shut, and and they did not mention anything aside from saying that she is that she's a pacifist. On the other hand, it's not that she met only with the Russian ambassador, but when at one point a journalist asked her when was she going to meet with the Ukraine ambassador, because I'll be honest here, there are only a few hundreds of meters away, the Russian and the Ukrainian embassies from each other. They're not exactly that far away in the on that avenue where most of the embassies in Bucharest tend to be, and she just simply refused, and she just had this idea that she kept on banging on about how the Ukrainians are the real warmongers. So these are essentially the short version of the motivations of the Constitutional Court. She is also not only Eurosceptic, but she is against the EU completely. I can understand this perspective, but once Romania, just like any country that joined the European Union, whenever they did, one of the requirements was to update the constitution through the national means, like a referendum, just like it happened in Romania or whatever. To update the constitution in order to also implement extra articles which would recognize plenty of things, starting from the existence of the European Union, from the authorities of the European Union, and things like that. And as much as anti-EU as you want to be, she really did go not just against certain laws which okay, it's not exactly difficult to do something illegal according to the law in Romania, but there's one story where there's one thing when you are illegal according to the law, and there's a completely different story when you're actually prosecuted because of that illegality. Prosecutions don't really happen for things like this, just like it doesn't happen right now. It, she committed something illegal, but it's not like it carried criminal sentences or even civil sentences aside from this one. But but what was more flagrant was was this exact thing with not respecting articles on the Constitution, and here with all the apologies for anybody who may be very emotionally compromised when it comes to the EU, and especially when it comes to respecting the law. In the Constitution has outlined ever since it was brought back in 1992 and 1993 after the Ceausescu regime fell, and there were no other provisional governments that tried to make sense of the mess that was after that. There have been these conditions. Not only you had to be past a certain age to be a candidate for presidency and to occupy, and so by default to occupy the seat of the president of Romania. Man, woman, doesn't matter. But there are also other articles, which I think it's Article 148 and 149 of the Romanian Constitution, where it also mentions that the role of the president is also to not only defend the Constitution, but to also defend the principles of the Constitution in itself. And when part of the Constitution you have re- mm, recognizing and respecting the authority of the European Union, just as the country voted it before its integration in 2007. Unfortunately, there isn't much that you can do about this. If you want to argue with the Constitution, well, you're welcome to do so. There are legal ways of doing this. you can start well, she's already got a political party. She can start a campaign in order to trigger a referendum, and to trigger a referendum specifically in order to change the constitution, in order to remove these things. That could be arranged, but that's not exactly what she did. But at the end of the day, she chose to candidate for the presidency, and it's not like these conditions are unknown. This is by no means a new scenario. The Romanians will surely be familiar with this scenario of another person who has been consistently thrown out of the presidential candidate list and has been thrown out constantly every time it tried to try to candidate. Here I'm talking about Miron Kozma. Miron Kozma has been in the past and still remains a very controversial individual because Miron Kozma was one of the main people during the social unrest in the late 90s, but especially I think in 96 and 98. He organized essentially rebellions of coal miners from the Valle Giuli area. So that will be if you look at the Carpathians, the um, the westernmost part of the Carpathian Mountains, below south geographically. He organized for tens of thousands of coal miners whenever uh, there's union or syndicate will have disagreements with the government, and whenever it will come to working conditions or pay or stuff like that, and also coal miners. If anybody has met coal miners, you can definitely say, just like with anybody who worked in heavy industry or heavy extraction, they're not the sort of people that you mess with. Those people are really well built. Those people are not exactly the most well spoken and civilized. And he succeeded in triggering not one but two rebellions like these, and also organized them. So by organizing, I mean all the dump trucks that were used by the coal mines to carry the coal from the mine to a further logistics point. They were all requisitioned. They were arranged in convoys. The coal miners would have went at the back, and they were all carried out for hundreds of kilometers all the way to Bucharest in order to protest against the government. But it wasn't just any sort of protest. Every time. And that's the reason why both of those and there was another one, but referring specifically to the last one that happened in '98, that was also speaking of emergency measures uh, tied to the previous article about registering your birds. That was the last time Romania, after Ceausescu had a symphony played at the machine gun for him. That was the first time when Romania implemented a state of emergency because they were way too many and they were way too violent and they did not exactly come to discuss civilized. And here even my parents were victims of those coal miners because they were just going to their jobs and they happened to be in the area where the miners decided to protest, and the coal miners perceived them to be some sort of bourgeois students from the capital, and proceeded to beat them with shovels. So whenever he tried to candidate for the presidency, he was all every time one person or another put that the electoral commission essentially an act of contest against the candidacy of this guy, and it always passed every time. It always passed every time, and even in this moment, so it wasn't just the initial shock that went out. It was also this guy Miron Kozma for the exact same reasons. Uh, and okay, the reasons differ, but while they differ, they're also pretty similar to each other. While Shoshaka reeks of being pro-Russian and also has a lengthy pieces of evidence where she doesn't exactly uphold at all the principles of the Romanian constitution or even the articles of the Romanian constitution. So not just the principles, but also what's written in the constitution itself. Just like this guy when he threatened the unity and the security of the state, also, which is an article of the constitution. That's exactly how things work. And whenever you may hear somebody saying that, oh no, well, this is a threat to democracy because all the judges from the Romanian Constitutional Court are appointed by the president, and in this case it happens to be still the current president, Klaus Iohannis, aka the ficus tree. Well, I'll be honest here. Well, it's more or less the same political class which has ruled in one way, shape, or form up until now is also the one that decided when they looked at how do they separate the powers in the state. Well, of course, between the judicial, executive, and legislative. They could have seen this as well. They could have seen this as well. Okay, well, then there may be a problem regarding the independence of justice if we let the president to be the one who uh, appoints judges and prosecutors, and especially judges at a court as important as this one. And here I'll be honest with you, seeing the way the Romanian Constitutional Court handled all the cases in the pandemic, they really are the ones that really do judge cases from the perspective of the Constitution. Of course, there are plenty of trolls in the parliament whenever there's a certain law, there's a certain project for a law which they don't like for whatever reason. One of the ways where they delay the procedures is to exactly mm, send an act of contest towards that certain law or that certain law project to the Constitutional Court. So because of course, for example. What sort of opinion would the Constitutional Court of Romania would have about increase the traffic fines? They're not gonna have any, but procedurally they'll still have to judge it, they will still have to discuss it between themselves, and they will still have to vote for it. This is also another important aspect since I mentioned the voting. Well, I think if I remember, the two of the judges were absent at the meeting when Shoshaka's candidacy was discussed, and still the consensus of the Constitutional Court was that five of the judges voted for canceling the candidacy of Diana Shoshaka, and there were two other judges that voted against. So even if, because this was an argument that was brought up but vanished just as fast as it appeared, even if the other two judges were present there, if they would have voted against the other five, the vote would have still been 5-4, and so the decision would have still stuck. And here there have been predictions done by people depending on the political perspectives of those judges, and they reached the same conclusion that okay, those judges, even if they were there, and even if say they would have voted against their mentality and and other things, it still would have been carried out, and Shoshaka's candidacy would have been cancelled. It just is the way, it just is the way it is. Here, I'm not here exactly to argue whether Shoshaka's position is good or bad. Here, I'm just saying things as they are. If you want to change anything in your own country or in a country, that means that you have to get involved in politics. Just as I said earlier, if Diana Shoshaka is so upset that and blames Americans, Jews, and the European Union of some grand conspiracy to rig the Romanian elections just so that she would not be a candidate. Because let's be honest, no, I'll be honest here. Diana Shoshaka has exactly zero chances of even ending up in the second run of the presidency. And so what sort of effort what sort of would have been done? But still, this being her first candidacy, and so in the future she could also be prevented based on the same ruling, just like it happened first with the individual mentioned earlier, Miron Kozma. But overall, that's as much as I can say. If Diana Shaka doesn't like it, she's always welcome to use her political notoriety to agitate sufficient people in order to collect sufficient votes in order to trigger a referendum to change the constitution so that the constitution no longer takes into consideration the the sort of societal upstanding of the individual who is a candidate for the presidency. Maybe it will work, maybe not. I'm pretty sure she already knows this, but this cheap theater that she's doing. Although when it comes to the European Union, I'm personally for it because the European Parliament is not a serious institution. Seeing the way things are done there, some of the worst people. By many other states, especially the states in Western Europe, are sent at the European Parliament essentially to secure them a decent pension and a nice income, which is not paid directly by the country where they come from. So yeah, some of the worst politicians ended up in the European Parliament. See, José Manuel Barroso, von der Leyen now, Jean-Claude Juncker, and the list goes on. The only competent politicians that were part of the European Parliament and they did not come from Eastern Europe but from Western Europe, it was UKIP. It was Nigel Farage, and he, and that was it. The rest, absolute garbage. And those guys in the Parliament were absolute garbage. They're that sort of garbage who got all the best from Brussels. What sort of curvature the banana that is sold in Romania or in Bulgaria or in Spain should have to get into perspective. Continuing on now with Asia, as I was saying, when the US and the UK can't keep a base essentially in the middle of the Indian Ocean for themselves, at least there are other countries who are picking up the slack in this conflict against China. Straits Times, more substantial cooperation. Singapore and South Korea to work towards upgrading ties to strategic partnership. In a troubled world, partnerships between like-minded countries are more important than ever, said Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. And in that vein, Singapore and South Korea are deepening and widening their relationship in areas from startups to food safety. Both will work towards upgrading ties to a strategic partnership in 2025. It will be a timely milestone, marking the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties, Prime Minister Wong said at a joint press conference with visiting South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol on the 8th of October. The upgrade is not just a change in name, it also means more substantial cooperation, said Prime Minister Wong. For one thing, the two countries are looking to upgrade the Korea-Singapore Free Trade Agreement to better meet the needs of their economies in today's digital age, he said. The trade pact, which eliminates more than 90% of tariffs for Singapore's exports to South Korea entered into force in March 2006. It covers goods such as motor vehicles, mechanical equipment, and minerals. Both sides also hope to expand on existing air services agreement to ride on the strong demand for air travel. This agreement was last expanded in November 2019 to allow more flights between Singapore and South Korea and more connections through third countries. Singapore and South Korea are also discussing ways to widen cooperation in areas such as defense, education, climate change, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and digital economy. I look forward to making substantial progress on all of these issues in the coming months, said Prime Minister Wong. I am confident that the bilateral cooperation between Korea and Singapore will continue to grow from strength to strength, and I look forward to working closely with President Yoon to take our bilateral ties to greater heights, he added. Mr. Yoon, who was received by President Tharman Shanmugatnam at a ceremonial welcome at Parliament House on the 8th of October, also called the planned upgrade in relations the first step in preparing for the next 50 years. Singapore and South Korea established diplomatic ties in 1975. President Yoon said both countries had limited resources but overcame the disadvantage by nurturing talent and establishing hubs for advanced technology and finance. This has allowed them to leap forward to become global economic powers, he said. Koreans regard Singapore as a companion with whom we have strived together towards national development over the past half-century, and a key partner with whom we will pioneer the future, he added. During the press conference at Parliament House, President Yoon and Prime Minister Wong witnessed the exchange of 5 memorandums of understanding covering supply chain, food safety, liquefied natural gas, small and medium-sized enterprises and startups, as well as technology. They also presided over the signing of an extradition treaty between the Minister of Home Affairs and Law K. Shanmugam and South Korea's Minister of Foreign Affairs Cho Tae-yul. Mr. Yoon welcomed the treaty, saying it will allow both countries to reinforce judicial cooperation so that fugitive criminals can be swiftly investigated, arrested, and transferred. Mr. Yoon and Prime Minister Wong also discussed South Korea's relations with ASEAN countries before their planned travels to Laos and to attend ASEAN meetings later in the week. This year marks the 35th anniversary of ASEAN-Korea dialogue relations. The two sides are set to establish comprehensive strategic partnership in Laos. Prime Minister Wong said he and Mr. Yoon discussed ways of strengthening ASEAN-Korea ties, such as by upgrading the ASEAN-Korea FTA and concluding the ASEAN-Korea Air Services Agreement. Singapore appreciates Korea's support for ASEAN's digital transformation through its ASEAN Core Digital Innovation Flagship Project, which will help unlock new opportunities for the digital economy, he said. The two leaders also discussed the situation in North Korea, which has in recent months strengthened ties with Russia and China. Prime Minister Wong said Singapore, which hosted the historic 2018 summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and then US President Donald Trump, wants to see a peaceful and stable Korean peninsula and will do whatever we can do to facilitate efforts towards this end. President Yoon said he and Prime Minister Wong shared the view that North Korea's nuclear development program will never be tolerated by the international community, and they will make sure to issue a clear, united message to the North during the upcoming ASEAN summit. Prime Minister Wong and I are committed to addressing regional matters and global issues in close consultation, said Mr. Yoon. Mr. Yoon, who is on his first state visit to Singapore as South Korea's president, arrived here on the 7th of October from Manila, where he held a summit with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Mr. Yoon leaves for Laos on the 9th of October. On the 8th of October, Mr. Yoon and his wife, First Lady Kim Kyung-hee, were hosted to lunch by Prime Minister Wong and Mrs. Wong at the Singapore Botanic Gardens. Mr. Yoon and his wife also had an orchard named in their honor, the Rose Pink Dendrobium Young Suk Yeol Kim Kyung-hee. President Farman and Mrs. Jane Itoge Shanmugatnam on the evening on the 8th of October hosted a state banquet at the Fullerton Hotel for Mr. Yoon and his wife, who wore a hanbok, a traditional Korean costume. On the menu were grilled pork satay, Korean red chili paste gochujang, crab meat bun, and nyonya fish curry served with the deok, or Korean rice cakes. During his welcome speech, Mr. Farman said Mr. Yoon's visit reaffirms the warm and enduring friendship between our two nations. He lauded the strong economic partnership between the two countries. Both are each other's seventh largest trade partner, and added that together we are also helping set new standards for open, efficient, and inclusive digital trade. Meanwhile, Senior Minister Lee Hsien-loong and Mr. Yoon reaffirmed the robust economic and people-to-people ties between both countries when they met on 8 October. They also exchanged views on regional and international developments, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said in a press statement. Senior Minister Lee welcomed South Korea's deepened engagement of ASEAN and its support for ASEAN centrality. Senior Minister Lee and Mr. Yoon agreed on Singapore and South Korea's shared interest in supporting the multilateral trading system and the rules-based international order. They also agreed on the potential for ASEAN and South Korea to do more in areas such as trade, connectivity, digitalization, food security, and the green transition. Well, it's good to see that after all, two significant economic superpowers from Southeast Asia and East Asia all together are getting closer in such a way. And it's not just these two countries getting together, because this also covers another important aspect when it comes to strategic partnership. That partnership also comes with the defense aspect of it. And here, well, let's be honest, and let's remember two things. South Korea is not exactly a big country in itself, and Singapore is even smaller. Singapore is essentially a city-state. But as we have seen ever since the war in Ukraine began, South Korea is essentially printing money right now with how many orders it has received for pretty top-notch equipment, which is comparable to what you can get from the already established Western manufacturers. But you essentially benefit from entry-level pricing, while you have quality comparable to to what the West already has. And that's already very beneficial. And of course, the Singaporeans have also looked into this aspect. And there is also even closer cooperation, but these are efforts which I'm pretty sure they are concerted behind closed doors, but they just aren't made public in such a way. Each country trying to cooperate with the ASEAN countries, so in such a way that that from what I see they kind of smelled that things are going to go when it comes to China from bad to worse. And as a consequence, even if indeed there is still significant Chinese propaganda, and there are a lot of bought and paid for Chinese shares, especially in countries like Malaysia. Overall, we can see how the needle of power is moving away from China, and with South Korea and Singapore making the first step, which would also be the first countries that would be threatened in case China does something stupid, and then everything goes hot from that moment. First of all, because South Korea is really close to China, and second being that Singapore in itself would be perceived as a threat, because well, what's the purpose of Singapore though? Why has it existed for so long? Ever since the days it was just a pirate kingdom, because it controls the most important trading corridor on the planet, which is the Strait of Malacca. And as a consequence, as much as Singapore tries to play nice with everybody, this is one thing that the countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia haven't forgotten, which in the West we have. Just as I mentioned, um, a few articles earlier about what the countries in Europe should have done when the Houthi rebels essentially undermining global trade and screwing over Europe directly because they shoot and bomb and they Allahu Akbar into every ship they perceive as Israeli. And this is something that if it were to happen in the Indian Ocean, in that area of the Indian Ocean, in all those archipelagos, that shit wouldn't fly there. But at the same time, all of these countries, they're way too small in order to put by themselves a consistent opposition in case something were to happen with China. And even though to some extent each country has its own defense deals, especially with the US, that's not sufficient either, because they also look at the same things as we see as well. What's happening with the leadership in the US and just how wonky things have started happening there as well. And referring here to the previous example with how the US exactly did not uphold the security guarantee deal signed under FDR in the 1940s, which meant that they had to bomb into oblivion the Houthis, which bombed from their own end the Saudi refineries. They kind of looked at this and they thought, well, shit, it means that we'll have there'll be a circumstance where we will have to fend for ourselves. But none of us is big enough to fend for ourselves in a vacuum. So we will have to cooperate in one way or another. So, well, Malaysia already is pretty well tied with Singapore because essentially Singapore is a tiny piece that was part of the Malaysian archipelago. And just the same as Indonesia, Indonesia in itself is also one of the most populous countries in that area. And it's even more fascinating since it's the most populous country when it's also an archipelago in itself. But that this is how we can clearly say that the needle of power is moving and is moving further south, which is further south from the east, which is a good thing, as as the geopolitical balance of power will be looking in a few years completely differently than it used to be in the past when it will come to the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean area, all the way to the South China Sea. Moving on now, still stuck to the Straits Times and this one because it's a pretty funny but also pretty interesting article in itself. Straits Times, fake rooms, bogus jobs. India is both a source and a victim of cybercrime. It was a tense day in late August for 82-year-old S.P. Oswal as he logged in to Skype to attend an online trial at the Supreme Court of India. He heard Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud bang the gavel twice and say, "Order, order, please present your case." After the judge delivered a verdict on the alleged money laundering case, the chairman of Vardhman Group, one of India's largest textile manufacturers, transferred 70 million rupees, so that would be 1.1 million Singapore dollars, that would be 750,000 US dollars, into a secret supervision account to avoid arrest. The next day, when Mr. Oswald confided in a colleague about what had happened, he realized that he had been scammed. The scheme involved a fabricated money laundering case with forged documents by a fake Central Bureau of Investigation, uniformed officials who took Mr. Oswald into digital custody, where he was kept under digital surveillance for 2 days via Skype, threats not to speak to anyone, a fake courtroom, a staged trial with someone impersonating the Chief Justice of India, and a secret bank account. This was perhaps the boldest and most elaborate cyber fraud in India to date. "My ordeal is nothing short of a movie script," the textile tycoon told reporters in Delhi. Fortunately, he went to the police quickly and was able to recover about 52.5 million rupees, but the rest had been withdrawn from bank accounts across Assam, West Bengal, and Delhi. Indians lose 150,000 rupees to cybercriminals every minute, while only 20% of the money lost is recovered, even as cross-border and interstate syndicates develop increasingly elaborate methods that the police are finding harder to pin down. Cybercrime ranks among the most prolific organized crimes worldwide. By 2025, it is projected to cause losses of 10.5 trillion US dollars. The World Cybercrime Index, published in the journal PLOS One, puts India in 10th position in the cybercrime hotspot list, topped by Russia, followed by Ukraine and China. Analysts say that India, with the growing but relatively inexperienced population of internet users, is both a growing source and victim of cybercrime. The locations of the syndicates are more widespread today. In the first week of September, the Cybersecurity Bureau in the southern state of Telangana investigated a case in which a 75-year-old retired public sector employee was duped of 130 million rupees after clicking on a seemingly lucrative stock investment link he had received on WhatsApp. The police found that the amount had been withdrawn through checks and ATM cards from multiple accounts spread across states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Kerala, with 20 million rupees withdrawn even from Dubai. With a probe kicking off as long as 50 days after the incident, the police could recover only 2 million rupees. They arrested 3 people in Hyderabad, but those from other states might be harder to identify so long as the crime, they said. Criminals have now gone beyond the semi-urban places like Jamtara in Jharkhand and Bharatpur in Rajasthan that had cybercrime cottage industries. It is more global now, with several hubs working in layers of criminal activity, and is much harder to trace, said Additional Director General of Police Shikha Goel, who heads the Telangana Cyber Security Bureau. The bureau receives about 290 complaints daily, with losses averaging 50 million rupees a day. While it has initiated the quicker judicial reform system of fund recovery in the past few months, nabbing the cybercriminals remains a complex task. Ms. Goel said the Indian scammers now work in collusion with cybercriminals across the world via the darknet and social media, and much of the money trail has cryptocurrency routes because this is not a very regulated sector. The biggest threat today is Southeast Asia's multi-billion-dollar cybercrime golden triangle of Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos, which is now prominent in cyberslavery with over 300,000 victims coerced into cybercrime in 60 countries, noted Ms. Goel. Investigations by Interpol and several countries into the Golden Triangle have shown that the infamous drug trafficking hub with Chinese links has evolved into an unrivaled cybercrime hotspot, where trafficked workers from across Asia orchestrate crypto fraud, money laundering, honey trap blackmailing, illegal gambling, and investment scams. With the emergence of this hub, Ms. Goel said, victims of cybercrime are forcibly turned into perpetrators. In mid-August, India's National Investigation Agency arrested social media influencer Bobby Kataria for allegedly trafficking Indians through his visa consultancy company in Gurugram, Haryana. An NIA statement accused him of luring job seekers with promises of jobs in countries like Singapore, taking advance payments, then handing them over to Chinese companies in the Golden Triangle, where they were forced to carry out cyber frauds and scams under harsh, strenuous, and restricted conditions. The Indian embassy in Vientiane said it has rescued 645 Indian nationals trapped in Chinese-run cyber scam centers from Laos's Bokeo province. In August, the Laos and Vietnam authorities arrested 771 and 154 people, respectively, who were suspected of working for a cyber scam network in the Golden Triangle. The alleged ringleader, Huan Bich-Ngok, 30, was apprehended at the Noi Bai International Airport in Hanoi. The police in different Indian states also arrested dozens of people for creating fraudulent apps for fake investments and laundering ill-gotten money. As cybercrimes become more sophisticated, law enforcement agencies are 10 steps behind, not just in India, but in the world over, said Mr. Pavan Dugal, cybercrime expert and chairman of the New Delhi-based International Commission on Cybersecurity Law. The multi-layered online operations on the dark web using AI make recovering the money and collecting incriminating electronic evidence to identify and prosecute criminals a daunting task, he said. Ms. Goel emphasized the urgent need for more robust cross-border coordination between law enforcement agencies. Mr. Dugal said separate legislation on cybercrime and dedicated cybercrime courts will speed up justice for cybercrime victims. Remarkably, scammers are impersonating even the Cybercrime Prevention Department, prompting the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center to issue a warning in 2024 about fake mails investigating officials of I4C with logos of the institution, falsely accusing people of cybercrimes, urging them to respond. Mr. Lugao said, cyber gangs are getting bolder, more efficient, using AI extensively for automating their calls and processing, and using fraud GPT to increase the scope and ambit of their operations. Fraud GPT is a product sold on the dark web and Telegram that works similarly to chatbot ChatGPT, but creates content to facilitate cyber attacks. It uses AI to enhance phishing, create sophisticated malware, and improve data mining for targeted attacks. In the widespread FedEx scams in India, fraudsters posing as anti-narcotics official or policemen accuse a person of receiving a package with drugs and not only take their bank details but also blackmail them into keeping their phone video on for days, watching them even as they sleep. A senior Bengaluru police officer told the Straits Times that for a touch of believable reality, some criminals appear on video in a room staged to appear like a police station, with a desk, a Mahatma Gandhi photo, and a police logo. In the case of a female lawyer in Bengaluru in April, scammers pretending to be customs official asked her to strip for a fake narcotics test, recorded a video, and then blackmailed her till she agreed to pay a ransom of 1.5 million rupees. As people have become aware of traditional cybercrimes of extracting passwords, one-time passwords, or bank account details, criminal syndicates are now developing dramatic and layered modus operandi that weaponize fear and panic, Mr. Dugal said, adding that Indians should never let their guard down online. Amid stories of victims losing millions, a small-town couple made headlines in late September for their quick thinking in an overpayment scam. A caller claiming to be from the paramilitary Central Industrial Security Force called the owner of a small cake shop in Bajpe, Karnataka, to order a cake and pretended to pay 28,000 rupees instead of 2,800 rupees. He sent a fake bank SMS as proof of payment and asked for the balance to be returned. However, the baker's wife checked the bank account and found that no money was received. The couple confronted the scammer and ultimately hung up, later sharing the story as a cautionary tale. Well, this is pretty complicated. Will I be joining the list because there have been already plenty of people that pissed off the Indians. First starting with Bolden Bankrupt, then Lord Miles did the same thing, and now I may be doing the same thing. Oh, and then there's also Janos from Living Ironically in Europe that succeeded in doing the exact same thing, but at least he did it on Twitter. He didn't do it on video. But what can I say about this? Is India a victim of its own success? Because these scams, let's remember the ones from the early 2000s, when Americans were called from India and duping area codes and country codes back then was much more difficult than it is today. When they pretended to be Microsoft tech support in order to be screwing over generally older people out of their pension money because or your computer has a virus and things like that. It's definitely disappointing to see what is happening, and there isn't realistically much to say here because when these are already this topic is already so over discussed and it's so well known already. That's why you have pretty smart people into the computer trade and into programming who pretty much made a career on YouTube out of scamming the scammers themselves. And even though I personally don't have the patience to watch some tens of minutes or even less hours of scam calls as those YouTubers organize them. Plus, nowhere gonna go as far as implementing voice modulation in order to pretend that you're a granny on the phone. We see how old this phenomenon is, but at the same time, even as this article says, and I'm pretty sure the Singaporeans and the journalists from the Straits Times, they wouldn't have any they wouldn't have any horse in this race to say that well, not exactly much is being done, because that's exactly the truth. Mm. If there is one common thing with all the countries in Southeast Asia and in East Asia, it's the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is absolutely atrocious. And even if there are plenty of people with good ideas on how to make this bureaucracy more efficient and more responsive in this case to things like these, highly doubtful that that things will change. That things will change soon until the moment when the scams will get a bit too big and the losses will get a bit too big, and then countries in the West who are the financial horsepower on this planet will start to have a say into this. Just like it happened years ago with a really lengthy lawsuit carried out in the US against Western Union by people who were scammed by the traditional Nigerian prince scams or scams with gold and diamond mines in Ghana or Senegal or whatever, stuff like that. Well, even if from a fundamental point of view, it's not, I wouldn't see the fault of the company which facilitated the money transfer to also be the ones that would demand from their own end damages for just being a facilitator. It's just like to understand just how ridiculous this is, and this is exactly what happened in the case of Western Union. It will be just like I will go to a shop now and buy a pistol. I'm gonna go and shoot somebody. I'm gonna get imprisoned, but the family not only will demand damages from me, but will also demand damages from the ones from the ones that either sold or built or built that gun that I used. Like for example, if I were to make my own gun or my own shotgun out of a single pipe, and I would just hold it and just strike a hammer to trigger the percussion cap, who would you sue in that moment? Or I could have used a different other tool. Say that I would have used a hammer and I would have bought it from Home Depot. W- would it sound any logical or fair to sue Home Depot because they sold that hammer to me? Obviously not, because 99.99999% of people who go buy hammers from Home Depot or any comparable stores do not go and buy it in order to use it as a murder weapon. But even more unfair, say that if this hypothetical scenario would be done, mm, find Home Depot at fault for selling me the hammer, just like Home Depot would have known that would have known that apparently or they should have guessed that I would have used the hammer with criminal intent. The same principle applies to the ruling against Western Union, and they had to pay. Let's be honest here, for about goddamn 14 or for 14, 16 years of scam transactions of people being duped in the US or in the West to send money to Nigeria or other African countries, even if uh, even if not long after the safeguards have been implemented by Western Union themselves. Nobody forced them. The traditional question is if anybody has ever had this experience with sending Western Union. Well, first of all, when you have the clear name of the person who you're sending it to, then they're gonna ask you, but they're gonna ask you, well, personal-ish questions. Well, do you know this person? Have you communicated with them? What's the purpose of this money? Well, it's not like Western Union will give a shit about what's the purpose of the money, but it's the responsibility of the guy behind the cashier desk to at least warn you. Well, are you sure that you're going to send this money? He's not going to stop you. He's not going to say it. He's just going to strongly suggest you. Well, probably will be a good idea to rethink what you're doing because it doesn't sound legitimate. That's as much as they can do. They can at the end of the day, it would be counterintuitive for Western Union to block payments because apparently the target recipient may be fraudulent because he lives in a certain country or may have a dubious name. Well, first of all, because that would trigger many more issues of another sort. But at the end of the day, it's not their responsibility. They're just the transfer facilitator, and that's it. So, well, when it comes to India, I'm not sure what exactly they'll be doing. But what I will say, and here the Indians and people from Asia will definitely understand me. How exactly do you dare you to pretend to be or to aspire to be a great country when you resort to shady businesses like these? I assume that you were better than this, and at one point you were better than this. The, are you really that going that low to sell your soul for scamming grannies out of gift cards from Amazon or Google Play Store? I understand that legitimate money is not exactly easy to make, but at the same time, it's also not corrosive to your karma or to your own morality, like it is scamming people, especially since the vast majority of people that you scam, they're not exactly the people who could afford such damages. Here, I'm just saying. This is about it from the 14th episode of the Victor News Network. Thank you very much for watching. I might remind you, Pılısı gibi şekerim. You got the Ko-fi and the subscribe store links. Those of you who may have my revolt, they know how to transfer directly. You know who you are. Again, it's preferable. You'll definitely help me a lot. Thank you very much for watching. In theory, I should see you next week. Have a good day and cheers.